The signature at the bottom of the insurance paper said Diane Hayes. It had her loops. It had her slant. It was so close to my dead wife's handwriting that for one long second I just sat there in my own living room staring at it, and the man across from me smiled, because he thought the silence meant he had won. He was wrong. There was one tiny thing wrong with that signature. One small thing no stranger on this earth would ever have caught, and that tiny thing is the reason the man who called himself Diane's future is sitting in a county jail tonight instead of spending her money. But that is not where this story starts. This story starts 11 days after my wife of 30 years died on an ordinary Wednesday, when a lawyer I had never laid eyes on slid a single brass key across his desk and told me it opened the door of a lake cabin I had never known she owned. And it does not truly begin until the gray afternoon I pushed open that swollen wooden door and found a small boy standing in the front room of my dead wife's secret house. A boy who took one look at my face and came running across the floorboards with both arms thrown wide, calling me by a name I had never been called in my life. Grandpa. Before I tell you the words that little boy said to me, and before I tell you what was hidden in the blue box on that cabin table, do an old man one kindness, my friend. Ride with me all the way to the end of this. Every single turn matters. And if you will, leave a comment telling me the town you are listening from, because I read everyone. And it does my heart good to see just how far a quiet life can reach. I was 64 years old the morning I lost her, and I need you to understand the kind of marriage we had, because if you do not understand what I thought I had, you cannot understand the size of what came after. Diane and I met late, both of us nearly 30, both of us a little surprised to find each other still out there. We met at a friend's barbecue in the summer of 1989, and the first thing I ever did in front of her was spill a full cup of lemonade on her shoe. I wanted the ground to open up and take me. She looked down at her wet shoe, looked back up at me, and laughed, and I decided right there on that lawn that I was going to marry her if she would have me. She would. I taught woodworking in shop class at Lincoln High in our little town in Ohio for 38 years. I spent nearly 4 decades standing in front of teenagers, teaching them how to measure twice and cut once, how to read grain, how to keep their fingers away from the blade. And I came home every night smelling of sawdust and varnish to a woman who kept the books for a dental office part-time and ran a small booth at the antique mall on Route 9 the rest of it. She refinished old dressers and sold them for more money than I ever believed people would pay for furniture. She had an eye. She could look at some scarred, water-stained thing left for dead in a barn and see what it used to be and what it could be again. Looking back now, I understand that was not just her talent. That was her whole life. We had no children. We tried in the early years, and when it did not happen, we made a quiet peace with it. Or I thought we did. We built a life out of small, dependable things instead. Sunday pancakes. Always. The same 2 coffee mugs, mine with the chipped handle she kept threatening to throw out and never did. 30 years of arguing pleasantly about whether the thermostat should sit at 68 or 70. She fell asleep on the couch during every movie we ever rented and swore each time that she had seen the ending. I would have told you the day before she died that I knew that woman down to the marrow. I would have bet the house on it. I would have bet everything I owned and everything I was on it. And here's the part that still keeps me up some nights. There was only one soft spot in all of it. One place in 30 years where the floor did not feel quite solid under me, and it was the weekends. Diane's buying trips. Once or twice a month, she would load up the car on a Friday and drive off to estate sales and auctions, sometimes one night, sometimes 2. And for most of our marriage, she had asked me, gently but in a way that never invited argument, to stop questioning those weekends. "The booth needs fresh stock, Walt," she would say. "You hate auctions anyway." And she would kiss my cheek and be gone before sunrise. And I let it go, because she was Diane, because 30 years of Sunday pancakes buys a person a lot of trust. Because a man can sense, the way you can sense a draft in a room, that there is a door somewhere you are not meant to open. And I chose for 3 decades to leave that door alone. I want you to remember that I chose it. It matters later. She died on the highway coming home from one of those trips, when a kid in a delivery van ran a red light at the bottom of the on-ramp. The trooper who came to my door was young, younger than most of the students I had taught, and he stood on my porch with his hat in his hands and said it was over before she would have felt anything, the way they always say, as if speed makes grief lighter. It does not. It just means there was no warning and no goodbye. 1 hour she was on the road somewhere north of town, probably singing along to the oldies station she loved, and the next hour a stranger was standing on my porch teaching me the exact shape of the rest of my life. For 11 days I moved through our house on Birchwood Lane like a man underwater. Her reading glasses still sat folded on the nightstand next to a library book, with the receipt tucked in as a bookmark. A load of her laundry still waited in the dryer, and I could not bring myself to fold it, because folding it would mean she was never coming back to do it herself. Her coat hung on the peg by the door. Her shoes sat under the bench, one of them still carrying dried mud from her last trip, and I found myself standing over that little smear of mud one morning, gripping the wall, because it was the last mark she had made on this world, and nobody had thought to tell it that. The neighbors brought casseroles I did not eat. Our pastor sat with me and said kind, useless things. The house ticked and settled and went on being a house, indifferent, and every room I walked into asked me the same question in a different voice. What are you going to do now? And I had no answer. I had no answer at all. Then, on the 12th day, a man named Raymond Albrecht knocked on my door holding a leather folder against his chest, like it might blow away in the wind. He introduced himself as an estate attorney, which struck me as odd right off, because our family lawyer for 30 years had been Bill Foster down at the courthouse, and Bill had handled our simple little wills the same as he had handled everyone's in town. I had never heard the name Albrecht in my life. He asked if he could come in, and his voice carried that careful, padded tone people use when they are about to set something heavy down in front of you. I led him into the living room and offered coffee out of habit, and he declined, and sat on the edge of the couch with the folder on his knees. And he looked around the room the way a man looks when he is deciding how much weight the furniture can bear. Mr. Hayes, he said, your wife came to my office a little over 2 years ago to set up some arrangements separate from the will you and she kept with Mr. Foster. She was very specific that these matters were to come to you only after she passed, and only directly from me. He paused, and his eyes had a sympathy in them that scared me more than anything he had said yet. There are assets she held that I do not believe you were aware of. My mouth went dry. In 30 years, Diane had never kept a single thing from me that mattered, or so I had always believed. We shared one checking account and one savings, and she handled both because she was good with numbers and I was not. I could not have told you within $500 what was in either one. It had never once occurred to me to look. What kind of assets? I managed to ask. He opened the folder and laid a brass key on the coffee table between us. It had a little paper tag tied to it with string, and on the tag, in Diane's small, careful handwriting I had been finding all over the house for 11 days, on grocery lists and notes stuck to the calendar by the phone, were 6 words in her own hand. For Walter. Please do not be angry. Please go alone. Beneath that was an address I did not recognize. A county road number out near a lake, 2 hours northeast. It is a cabin, Albrecht said gently. On Tamarack Lake. She purchased it through a separate account 7 years ago. The deed is in her name only, and per her instructions the ownership passes directly to you. No probate, no waiting. She asked that you visit before you decide what to do with it, and she was emphatic that you go by yourself the first time. She said there were things there you would need privacy to make sense of. 7 years. For 7 years, my wife had owned a house I had never seen, paid for with money I had apparently never noticed leaving accounts I had never looked at. The woman who could not keep my birthday present hidden in the hall closet for more than a day without dropping hints had somehow built an entire secret over the better part of a decade and carried it past me every single morning at the breakfast table. I sat there holding that key, and the metal warmed against my palm, and it felt like holding something that belonged to a stranger. And I want to be honest with you here, because I promised you the truth of it. The first thought that crossed my mind was the ugly one, the one every person who has ever watched a movie thinks. Another man. A whole second life. Some fella up at that lake who knew a Diane I had never met. I hated myself for thinking it. I have never been more relieved to be wrong about anything in my life, and I have never been less prepared for what the truth turned out to be. Because here's the thing I could not get past, the thought I kept circling back to that made my chest ache worse than the key. 2 nights before the van ran that light, we'd been sitting at the kitchen table, and I had been talking about my retirement that coming spring, about maybe finally taking that long drive west she always said she dreamed of, all the way to the Oregon coast so she could put her feet in the Pacific. And she had gone quiet, and she had looked at me with an expression I could not read then, and can read perfectly now, something halfway between sorrow and relief. And she had started to say, "Walt, there's something I have needed to tell you for a long time." Then her phone rang. One of those calls she always took in the other room. She looked at the screen and something moved across her face, and she got up and stepped out, and when she came back, she was smiling her ordinary smile and asking whether I wanted more coffee, and the moment closed over like water and was gone. 48 hours later, she was gone too. I have replayed that minute at the kitchen table 10,000 times. What was she about to say? Who was on that phone? And why, dear God, did I let her walk out of the room? I did not drive out to the lake for 9 more days. I told myself it was the funeral, the paperwork, the casseroles. But the truth is I was afraid. Some cowardly part of me wanted to leave that door shut forever, to bury her as the woman I had thought she was, rather than learn whatever waited behind a key tagged. Please, do not be angry. Because I understood, even then, even before I knew a single fact, that whatever was on the other side of that door was going to change the woman in my memory, and the woman in my memory was all I had left of her. You do not give that up easily. But a man cannot live in a house where the dryer is still full of his wife's laundry forever, and on a raw gray afternoon in early spring, with the snow gone to mud and the trees still bare, I finally got in the truck and pointed it northeast. The drive took 2 hours, and I remember almost none of it. I remember stopping once for gas and standing at the pump, realizing I did not know what I would say when I got there, or who I would say it to, or whether there would be anyone to say it to at all. Tamarack Lake turned out to be one of those small, pretty lakes ringed with old cabins, the kind of place families pass down for generations, docks sticking out into dark water, smoke leaning out of chimneys, everything quiet in that expectant way the country gets in early spring before anything has decided to be green yet. The cabin at the address was modest, nothing like the luxury I had half braced myself for. Cedar shingles gone silver with weather. A little dock, a stone chimney, a hand-painted sign by the door that said, "The Hideaway," in letters I recognized as Diane's, the same looping letters from the tag on the key. And then I saw the 2 things that made my stomach drop clean out of me, though I could not have told you why. A swing set in the side yard, and a child's red bicycle leaned against the porch rail. I sat in the truck a long while, with the engine ticking as it cooled, staring at that bicycle. My wife was 60 years old when she died. We had no children, no grandchildren, no nieces or nephews who visited. There was no reason on God's green earth for there to be a swing set and a red bicycle at a cabin my wife had secretly owned for 7 years, unless there was a reason. Unless the reason was the whole point of the cabin. I want to tell you I marched right up those steps. I did not. I sat there until the sky went a shade darker, working up to it, and then I made myself get out and walk up the steps and work the swollen door open with my shoulder, the way you have to with old lake places. The inside smelled like her. That is the thing that nearly put me on my knees before any of the rest of it. Lavender soap, the kind she used, mixed with wood smoke and lake water. And for one dizzy second my body forgot she was dead, and expected her to come around the corner, wiping her hands on a dish towel. A fire had burned down to coals in the stone hearth. Burned down, but still warm. Somebody had been here, and recently there were quilts she had made folded over the back of a worn couch, quilts I knew stitch by stitch because I had watched her make them in our living room for 30 years, and I stood there thinking, so this is where the quilts went. She told me she sold them. She told me she sold them. She told me people at the mall could not get enough of her quilts. On the mantel was a row of framed photographs, and I took one step toward them, and that was when I heard it. Footsteps. Light and quick. And a child's voice, somewhere deeper in the cabin, asking who was at the door. I froze with my hand still on the latch. I want you to picture me there, 64 years old, a widower of 3 weeks, standing uninvited in a house he did not know existed, listening to a child move through rooms his dead wife had furnished in secret. A little boy came around the corner from the kitchen, maybe 4 years old, with a cracker in one hand, and he stopped when he saw me, and I stopped when I saw him, because the child had Diane's eyes, her exact dark eyes, and a small round face I had never seen before in my life. And then his whole face opened up like a door swinging wide, and he dropped the cracker, and he ran straight at me across the floorboards, and he threw both arms around my leg, and he looked up, and he said the words that split my life clean in half. "You are Grandpa Walt. Nana said you would come someday." I had to grab the door frame to keep from going down. Grandpa. The boy had never seen me in his life, and he knew my face. And the only way he could have known my face was the row of photographs on that mantel. And the only way he could be calling me Grandpa, the only way on this earth, was if my wife had been telling this child stories about me, building me up in his imagination, getting him ready for a day she must have planned and never lived to see. I stood there with a stranger's grandchild hugging my leg, and my heart slamming around inside my chest like a bird in a garage, and that was when I became aware of someone else in the room. In the kitchen doorway, a man had appeared. He was around 40, tall, with a few days of beard and tired eyes, holding a dish towel. He had gone pale at the sight of me. And he had Diane's eyes too. The same dark brown, the same shape, the same way of tilting his head that she had when she was trying to figure out what someone was about to do. But the thing that hit me hardest, the detail I could not make sense of then and still think about now, was how plainly he had been crying. His eyes were swollen and red-rimmed, and when he saw me, his chin started to tremble like he was fighting to hold himself together in front of the boy. He set the towel down slowly, like a man setting down a weapon he has decided not to use. "Eli, buddy," he said, "give Grandpa some room." His voice cracked on the word Grandpa, like he had been saying it in his head for years, and had never once said it out loud. The boy let go of my leg, and the man crouched and steered him gently toward the couch with a coloring book. The way you do when you need a child occupied so the adults can fall apart quietly. Then he straightened up and looked at me, and for a long moment neither of us could find a single word. The coals ticked in the hearth. The boy hummed over his coloring book. And finally the man said, "You are Walter. You are Diane's Walter." And his eyes filled up again, and he said, "I am so sorry. I have been trying to figure out how to reach you for 3 weeks, and I could not. I did not even know if you knew we existed." He put out his hand, and then he said the 4 words that I am still, all these months later, trying to finish understanding. I am Aaron. Diane was my mother. I sat down hard on the arm of the couch. The room tilted. "That is not possible," I said, though I do not know what I thought I was arguing against. "We did not have children. We could not. Not with you," he said quietly, lowering himself into the chair across from me, keeping that careful distance like he thought I might bolt. "She had me before she ever met you. A long time before. She was 20 years old." He pressed the heel of his hand against one eye. "She gave me up." "I am sorry. I rehearsed this 100 ways," he said, "and they all sound cruel out loud. I did the arithmetic before I could stop myself. The way a man grabs a railing on a stair." Aaron was 40. Diane had been 60 when she died. She had carried this man inside her when she was 20, a full decade before the night I spilled lemonade on her shoe at that barbecue. There had never been any overlap with us. There had been no betrayal of our marriage bed. No lie about the babies we could not have. Whatever this was, it had happened in another life entirely. In a life before I was even a stranger to her. And somehow that made it worse and better at the same time. Worse because it meant she had walked into our marriage on the very first day already carrying a locked room inside her, and she had kept it locked for 30 years. Better, because it meant the 30 years themselves had been real. I held on to that. I held on to that like a railing, too. "Where have you been?" I started, and had to clear my throat. "All these years." Aaron got up and took one of the frames off the mantel and put it in my hands. It was Diane, but a Diane I had never met. Younger and softer than the woman I married, sitting on a porch step with a boy of maybe 9 on her knee, both of them squinting into the sun and laughing. And I want to tell you something, friend. I was jealous of a photograph. I was jealous of a patch of sunlight that fell on my wife 20 years before I knew there was anything to be jealous of. That is what secrets do. They make the living unreasonable. "I grew up in Cleveland," he said. "Adopted by a good family, the Coles. It was a closed adoption. She did not know where I had gone, and I did not know who she was. When I turned 30, I put my name in one of those registries, mostly just to fill in the blank, and she had put hers in years before, hoping. We found each other almost 10 years ago." He sat back down. "She told me right away there was a part of her life I could not be part of yet. A husband. A whole marriage. She said she had built something good and honest with you, and she was terrified of what telling you the truth would do to it. She said you were the kindest, steadiest man she had ever known, and that she had been a coward for 30 years and did not know how to stop being one." Her words, not mine. I looked down at the young Diane in the photograph, laughing in a sunlight I never stood in, and I felt something fracture quietly in my chest. "The buying trips," I said. "Some of them," Aaron admitted. "When Eli was born, she started coming more. She bought this place so we would have somewhere together that was not a hotel or parking lot. She helped me get on my feet after my divorce. She read Eli bedtime stories over the phone." He swallowed. "She showed him your picture every single time and told him about Grandpa Walt, the man who builds beautiful things out of wood. She said one day, when she had found her courage, she was going to bring us all together at this table." He looked at the kitchen table, an old pine thing with 4 chairs, and I noticed for the first time that one of the chairs was smaller than the others, sized for a child. "She was so sure she had time," he said. I had to set the frame down because my hands were shaking too badly to hold it. On the floor, Eli was humming to himself and coloring a dinosaur purple, oblivious, the way the very young get to be, and I envied him that too. And I understood, sitting in that little cabin that smelled of my dead wife, that I had 2 choices. I could get up and drive home to Birchwood Lane and grieve the marriage I thought I had, and let this room and these 2 people stay sealed up with her forever. Or I could stay and let myself learn who she really was, all of it, the parts that would hurt and the parts that already, against all sense, were starting to feel like a strange kind of gift. I will not pretend it was a noble decision. It was the smell of lavender soap that decided it. I could not make myself leave a room where she still lingered. I stayed. Aaron made coffee strong and a little bitter, the exact way Diane made it, and I drank it standing up because sitting felt like agreeing to something I was not ready to agree to. And after Eli went down for a nap in a back bedroom, Aaron brought out a wooden box. It was an old recipe box, painted blue, the kind Diane refinished by the dozen, and the lid was worn smooth from being opened and closed 1,000 times. "She kept this here," he said, setting it on the table between us. "She told me more than once that if anything ever happened to her before she told you everything, I was to give it to you. She said it would explain better than I ever could." He pushed it toward me, and then he said the thing that turned the afternoon from sorrow into something with an edge on it. "There are letters. Some to me. Some to a man named Curtis. And a lot of them to you." My throat tightened at my own name. "Who is Curtis?" I asked, and something shifted in Aaron's face, a guardedness coming down like a shade being pulled. "Curtis Vance," he said, "my biological father. The man who got a 19-year-old girl pregnant and disappeared." He looked away, out the window at the gray lake, and when he spoke again, his voice had gone flat and hard in a way it had not been all afternoon. "He came back into her life about 2 years ago. And he is the reason I have been so scared of how I would find you." He pushed the box an inch closer to me. "Read the letters, Walter. Start with the ones to me. Then you will understand what we are dealing with." what we are dealing with, not what we dealt with. Present tense. I noticed it even then, and I filed it away, and I lifted the lid with hands that would not stay still. Inside were dozens of envelopes, cream-colored, bundled with ribbon, sorted by recipient the way Diane sorted everything in her life, neatly, completely, and just out of sight. I took the top letter from the stack addressed to Erin. It was dated about 3 years back, and as I unfolded it, her handwriting swam in front of my eyes. "My Erin," it began. "You asked me again last week why I have not told Walter about you, and I owe you a real answer instead of another excuse. The truth is, I am protecting myself, not him. Walter is good all the way through. If I told him the truth, that I had a son at 20 and gave him away and never breathed a word of it in 30 years of marriage, I am afraid of what I would see in his face. Not anger. Disappointment. I could survive his anger. I do not think I could survive watching him realize he gave his whole honest heart to a woman who kept a secret the size of a human being. He talks sometimes about how he wishes we had children, and every time he does, I want to tell him I have a wonderful son. He would be proud to know. But the words will not come, and every year of silence makes the next year's silence heavier. I am a coward, my boy, but I love you, and I am running out of years to be brave in. I had to stop. My eyes were burning, and I will tell you plain that I had to put the letter down and pretend to study the grain of that pine table until I could trust my face again. Across the table, Erin sat very still, letting me read, giving me the privacy of his silence. And after a while, I picked up a second letter. This one addressed to the man named Curtis, dated more recently, maybe a year and a half before she died. And this one had a different temperature entirely. Curtis, it read, "Erin is asking about you again. He wants to know if you ever think of him. I do not know how to tell him the truth. That you have spent more energy in the last 6 months asking me about my house and my savings than you have ever spent asking about your own son. When you first found me again, I let myself believe the old feelings meant something. I was lonely in a way I could not admit, and you said all the right things. But I have started to notice what you actually ask about. And it is not Erin, and it is not me. It is money. I am not the foolish girl you left at the bus station 40 years ago. I see you now." My hands had gone cold by the last line. I set the letter down and looked at Erin. "He came back for money," I said. "He came back saying he wanted a second chance," Erin said bitterly. "At her. At being my father. And for a while, I think she wanted to believe it too. I think she even let herself imagine some version where we would all be one family, where I would finally have both my parents and Eli would have grandparents on every side." He shook his head slowly, but the longer it went on, the more she figured out what he really was. Keep reading. "The ones to you come last." She wrote them right up until the end. Right up until the end. I dug to the bottom of the box where a thick bundle waited with my name on every envelope. Dozens of them, years of them, a whole conversation she had been having with me in the dark, and I pulled out the one with the most recent date, written only weeks before the highway, before the van, before the red light, and I unfolded it and made myself read it aloud, because somehow saying her words in my own voice felt like the closest I would ever come again to hearing her speak. "Walter, if you are reading this, then either I finally found the nerve to tell you the truth, or I waited too long and something happened to me first. Knowing me, I am betting on the second. I have a son. His name is Aaron. He is 40 years old, and he is the best thing I ever did and the deepest secret I ever kept. I had him when I was 20 and gave him up because I had nothing to offer a child, and I spent the next 10 years before I met you carrying a grief I never let anyone see. Then you came along with your sawdust and your terrible jokes and your steady, patient heart, and I loved you, Walter. I truly did. But I was already a woman with a locked room inside her, and I never let you in because I was afraid of what the light would show. I was wrong. You would have loved him. You would have loved him from the first day. The way you love everything you build, slow and sure, and for keeps. I cheated us both out of 30 years of that, and I will be sorry for it wherever I am going. I could not finish it. I folded it back along its worn creases and pressed it flat against my chest, and for the first time since the trooper came to my door, I cried, not the silent leaking I had been doing for weeks, but the real thing, ugly and shaking, for the woman I had lost twice now, once to a delivery van and once to the truth, and for the son I had never been given the chance to refuse or accept. Aaron did not try to comfort me, which I was grateful for. He just sat with me in it, and after a while he wiped his own eyes and said very quietly, "There is more you need to see." Letters where she talks about Curtis at the end, about what she figured out he was planning. Planning. There was that tense again. Something in this story was not finished. I could feel it now, the way you can feel weather changing in your joints. And I dried my face, and I picked up the next letter, and we went through that box together as the afternoon failed, and the light over the lake went from gray to gold to nearly nothing. And what we pieced out of it stopped my tears cold, and replaced them with something harder. The early letters about Curtis were nostalgic, even hopeful. She had let him back in gently, the way you might let in a stray you half-remembered loving. But as the months passed, the tone curdled into weariness, and then into something I can only call alarm. He had started asking Diane to change her will. He had suggested she take out new life insurance and name him on it, said it would prove she was serious about a future together. He had wanted to know the details of my teacher pension, and whether he could get at it in a divorce. My pension? A man I had never met had been sitting somewhere asking my wife how to get at the money I had earned across 38 years of standing in front of teenagers. And then I came to the letter, from maybe 10 months before she died, where her handwriting nearly gouged through the paper, and I read it twice. And the second time I read it out loud, because I could not believe the first. He asked today how much I would get if anything happened to Walter, as if my husband were a lottery ticket and not a man. I told Curtis to never speak Walter's name to me again, and he laughed and said I was being sentimental. I've made so many mistakes, but I will not let this one cost the only man who ever loved me honestly a single dollar he earned. I am done with Curtis. I am calling Mr. Albrecht to undo every arrangement I ever let that man talk me into. The room was very quiet. That is why she went to the new lawyer, I said slowly. The pieces sliding together with a click I could almost hear. Not to hide things from me, to protect things from him. She started unwinding all of it about 2 years ago, Aaron said. She told me she had decided to come clean to you. She was going to tell you everything after your retirement party. Sit you down at the cabin, introduce you to me and Eli, let the chips fall. She said you deserve the truth before you put in your last day at the school. She thought retirement would make it easier on you, that you would have time to figure out how you felt. His voice broke apart on the next sentence. She had it all planned for this spring. She missed it by a few weeks. I sat there in the dark cabin holding the last letter my wife had written me, and I felt the grief reshape itself into something I could almost stand. She had not been planning to leave me. By the end, she had been planning to come home, fully, honestly, the locked room finally thrown open. The accident had not interrupted a betrayal. It had interrupted a homecoming. And I want you to hold on to that, friend, because I held on to it with both hands. That might have been the whole of it. A sad and tender story I would carry quietly for the rest of my days. If Curtis Vance had stayed gone, he did not stay gone. 3 days after I came home from the lake, while I was sitting at my kitchen table trying to understand what to do with the rest of my life, a knock came at the door, and I opened it, and a tall man in an expensive jacket that had seen better days was standing on my porch. I knew him before he said a word, the same way I had known Aaron. There was something in the set of him I recognized from Diane's letters, something smooth and watchful. He had a confident, easy smile that did not reach his eyes, and he stuck out his hand like we were old acquaintances. "You would be Walter," he said. "I am Curtis. Diane and I went way back. I figure it is time you and I had a conversation." I did not shake his hand. "I know exactly who you are," I said. That cooled the smile by a few degrees, but he recovered fast and let himself talk past me into the living room, the way men like that always seem to. And he took a seat in my own chair before I had offered it. Her chair, really. The one by the window where she did her stitching. He set a folder on the coffee table. The same kind of folder, I noticed, that the honest lawyer had carried, and the sight of it made my skin crawl. "I will be straight with you," he said, leaning back. "Diane and I were planning a life together before her accident. She was leaving you. She set money aside for our future, for me and for Aaron, our son. There are insurance policies, an account, and that cabin up at Tamarack she meant to put in my name." He opened the folder and fanned papers across my coffee table. Documents thick with signatures and figures, and tapped one with a finger. "We are talking the better part of $500,000, Walter. It is legally promised, and I intend to collect what is mine. I would rather not make it ugly. But that boy needs his real father in his life, not some stand-in he just met. You walk away from all of it quietly, the money and the kid, and nobody has to drag your dead wife's name through a courtroom." I felt the rage come up in me slow and clean, like cold water rising in a well. 3 weeks earlier, I might have crumbled. I had handed Diane every financial decision for 30 years. I did not know an insurance writer from a tax form, and this man was counting on exactly that. He was gambling that the grieving old shop teacher would not know enough to call his bluff. But I had read the letters now. I had read in my wife's own desperate hand that she had cut this man off and gone to Albrecht to undo everything he had pressured her into. And I had spent 38 years watching teenage boys try to talk their way out of trouble with confidence and not much else. I knew the look of a man holding nothing. "Let me see those," I said evenly, and held out my hand for the papers. He passed them over, smug, certain. I looked at the insurance documents, and then I looked at the signatures, and a small, cold certainty settled in me. I am no expert, but I had 30 years of Diane's signature in my memory, on greeting cards and Christmas lists, and the back of every check we ever wrote, and the loops on these were not hers. They were close. They were practiced. But they were not hers. The D was wrong, too tall and too careful, like a drawn picture of her D, instead of the quick one she wrote without thinking. And the little tail she always put on the last letter of her name, a habit from girlhood she had never broken, was missing. Every single time. Missing. And here's the moment I want you to sit with, because everything turned on it. He was watching my face. I could feel him watching my face the way a poker player watches, waiting to see if the old man was going to fold. And I made a decision in about 3 seconds that I had no way of knowing was the right one. I did not let him see what I saw. I gathered the papers back into a neat stack, and I put on the most tired, harmless, manageable face I had in me, and I said, "I will need a week to have my lawyer look these over. If everything is in order, like you say, then we will talk." His smile came back full force. "Now you are being smart," he said, standing, leaving a number scrawled on my notepad. "1 week, Walter. Do not be a fool about it." And he let himself out the way he had let himself in. The moment his car left the driveway, I was on the phone to Raymond Albrecht, and I drove to his office the next morning with the folder Curtis had left and the blue box from the cabin riding in the seat beside me like a passenger. Albrecht spread the documents across his desk under a lamp, put on his reading glasses, and went very quiet for a long time. Then he took the glasses off and looked at me with something between sympathy and steel. "Mr. Hayes," he said, "I personally prepared every beneficiary designation your wife held. I have the originals in this office. There is no policy naming this man. There is no account in his name. And the cabin transferred to you exactly as she wished, the moment she died." He tapped the papers with one finger. "These are forgeries, decent ones, but forgeries." Then he leaned back and said, "I would add something else, because I think you should hear it. About 16 months ago, your wife sat in that chair you are in now and made me promise her something. She said she had made a serious mistake, letting a man back into her life who had been pressuring her about her finances, and she wanted every door he might come through closed and locked. She had me reverse some changes she had started to make and put everything plainly in your name. Her last words to me that day were, and I wrote them down, because they struck me, 'I want to make sure Walter is taken care of, and I want to make sure no one can ever use my mistakes to hurt him." Albrecht folded his hands on the desk. "She kept that promise, Mr. Hayes. To the letter." I had to look out the window for a moment to keep my composure. She had stood guard over me, even in dying. Even from inside a secret I never knew she carried, she had reached forward in time and put her body between me and the very thing she had half let in. Then Albrecht said the thing that turned the whole matter, the thing that put the last piece in my hand. "What this man has done is not just a baseless claim, you understand. Presenting forged documents to extract money is a felony. Forgery, attempted fraud. And if he made threats to obtain that money, extortion. If you're willing, I would like to bring these to the county prosecutor." I thought about Curtis Mance sitting in my dead wife's chair with his practiced smile, telling me a 4-year-old needed his real father. I thought about Diane at 19, left at a bus station. I thought about the loops of her signature, forged by a man who had never once earned the right to write her name. "Do it," I said quietly. "Let him come collect." I did not say a word to Curtis. I let the week run out. And when he showed up on my porch on the 8th day, all confidence in that empty smile, expecting a beaten old man with a check, what he got instead was a sheriff deputy and an investigator from the prosecutor office stepping out of the car parked across my street, holding the forged documents he had handed me with his own fingerprints all over them. I stood in my doorway and watched his face fall through every stage of it. Surprise, then anger, then something close to fear. And I did not say anything at all. I had spent my whole life letting Diane do the talking, the planning, the protecting. This one thing I could do for her in return, and I did it without raising my voice once. They walked him to the car. He looked back at me over his shoulder, and the mask was all the way off now, and what was under it was small and mean, and not worth the powder to blow it up. I just closed the door. That evening I drove out to the lake to tell Aaron it was over. He met me on the porch, and when I told him, he sat down on the steps and put his face in his hands, and stayed that way a long while. Ely came out and climbed into his lap, and Aaron held him tight enough that the boy squirmed. When he finally looked up, his eyes were wet, but his face had something steadier in it than I had seen there before. "I spent my whole life wondering about him," he said. "Curtis. I built up this story where if I could just find my real father, something missing would click into place." He let out a shaky breath. "Turns out the story was better than the man. The man only ever wanted what he could take." He looked at me then, really looked at me. "You came out here not knowing if I was a con or a stranger or what, and you read every word she wrote, and you protected us. You did not have to. We have no claim on you, Walter. You could have walked away clean. Being somebody's father is not about blood," I said, surprising myself a little with how sure I was of it. "I taught other people's kids for 38 years. Watched plenty of them get raised by men who showed up, and plenty more get let down by men who did not. Showing up is the whole job, Aaron. That is all it ever was." I cleared my throat, which had gone tight. "Your mother dreamed up a day when we would all sit at this table together. She did not get it. I would hate for the two of us to throw it away just because she ran out of time." Ely, who had been listening the way small children do, half understanding and wholly tuned to the feeling in the air, slid off his father's lap and came and leaned against my knee and looked up at me. "Are you going to come back, Grandpa Walt?" he asked, and the word landed in me clean and whole this time, not as a wound, but as a door swinging open. "As often as you will have me," I told him, and I meant it down to the ground. There is no neat ending to a thing like this. Grief does not close up like a finished cabinet. It stays a little rough no matter how you sand it. But I can tell you where we are now, a few months on, and you can decide for yourself whether it is a happy ending or just an honest one. I sold the house on Birchwood Lane. It was full of a marriage I had misunderstood, and I could not keep rattling around inside it pretending I still knew where everything was. I folded her laundry before I left. That was the last thing I did in that house. I took a small apartment about 20 minutes from the lake. I see Aaron and Eli most weekends and a fair number of weekdays besides. I have been teaching Eli how to sand a board with the grain, his small hands over mine on the block, and I have been teaching Aaron the things a man learns from a father if he is lucky, and has to learn the hard way if he is not. We do not talk about Curtis. Last I heard, he took a plea on the fraud charge and will not be bothering anyone for a good while. That is all the room I will give him in this story, which is more than he gave to 40 years of his own son's life. The forgiveness took longer than the rest. For a while I was angrier at Diane than I had ever been at anyone, angry at 30 years of a locked door, angry that she had let me find out from a tag on a key and a boy's outstretched arms. Some nights I argued with her out loud in that empty apartment like a fool. But I have read those letters so many times now that the creases have gone soft as cloth. And what I keep coming back to is this. A frightened 20-year-old girl made one decision out of love and fear, and then spent the next 40 years too ashamed to undo the silence around it. And in the end, she was on her way back to me when the world took her off the road. She was not a liar who happened to love me. She was a woman who loved me and could not forgive herself. And those are not the same thing, though they can look alike in the dark. So I forgive her. I forgive her for all of it. The secret and the silence and the years. Because if she had been braver sooner, I would have had 30 years with Aaron. But if she had never been brave at all, I would have had none. She gave me a son and a grandson on her way out the door, and I am not fool enough to be angry at a gift just because of how it came wrapped. This fall, the three of us are taking that drive west, the one Diane always talked about, all the way to the Oregon coast, so I can stand at the edge of the Pacific the way she dreamed of doing and never managed. Ely has a list of every gas station with a slushy machine along the route, because he is 4, and that is what matters when you are 4. Aaron is bringing the photograph from the mantle, the one of Diane Young, and laughing in a sunlight I never stood in. And we are going to find a stretch of beach and let the wind have her at last. The part of her that never got to go. I am 64 years old, and I am starting a family I did not know I had, and by every sensible measure it should frighten the daylights out of me. Instead, it feels like the truest thing I have ever done. I thought I had lost everything the morning that trooper knocked on my door. It turned out I was only losing the things I had misunderstood to make room for the ones I had been missing all along. So that is the story, my friend. All of it, the way it really happened. And now I am going to ask you for those things I mentioned, and I am not going to be shy about it, because an old man learns not to save his honesty for later. If this story found its way into you anywhere, leave a comment below and tell me the town you are listening from, and tell me if there is someone on the other side of your own locked door. I read every single comment, and some nights they are the best company I have. If you have not subscribed yet, please do it now, because I have more of these stories, true ones and nearly true ones, and I would hate for you to miss the next one the way I nearly missed the best part of my own life. Tap the like button too, not for me, but so this story travels a little farther and maybe lands in front of somebody who needs to hear it tonight. Somebody who has been waiting for courage the way Diane waited for hers. And before you go, take it from a man who learned the hard way. If there is somebody in your life you have been keeping a locked door against, out of fear or pride or shame, or just the stubborn habit of silence, do not wait for retirement. Do not wait for the right spring. Do not wait for the courage you think you will have someday. Open the door now. Some of us run out of some days before we ever get the chance. Sometimes the family we end up with looks nothing like the one we planned, and that turns out to be the whole point. The door you are afraid to open might be the one leading you home. A small honest note before you go, friend. This story was created and fictionalized by AI, shared here to bring you a moment of warmth and entertainment, and to leave behind one small true lesson worth carrying. Thank you for riding with an old man all the way to the end. I will see you in the comments.